And I'm not tenderhearted, I got allergies, okay? So don't buy into that. If I get sniffly and cry and all that, it's all this pollen. Yeah, right? How many know God changes everything, huh? Right? And absolutely, for me, that is no exception. I was, just in a dark place and just as lost as anybody. I mean, I look like I'm all well and fine and dandy put together and clean cut and all that great stuff, which I am now, but I'm light years from where I was. And thank God for a program like this. Thank God for people like John who invested in me. Accountability partners, I've got tons of accountability partners out here. Thank you. I think that anybody that would question themselves or even think about it for just a moment, how much farther along you are, how much farther you've made it in your recovery and whatever the struggle may be. Mine happens to be alcohol, but there's a million of them. How much farther are you along just because of people investing in you? Because you could reach out to a sponsor, because you could talk to an accountability partner. It's huge, people. It's huge. So many people want to believe the lie that they can do it alone. And I'm not saying that you can't. But man, I'm going to tell you that if you will do it with a network and a group and invest yourself and put in the work, you'll go so much farther, so much faster. It's unreal. But anyway, I'm not up here to try to yammer, but all right. My name, as you all know, is Brian. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I struggled. It's the pollen. Woo. I struggled with drugs and alcohol. To start, I want to read the first verse that really connected me during my recovery process. It's 1 Corinthians 10:13. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. Ooh. He will not allow the temptations to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. As a young child, my life for me was pretty normal. My mom stayed home, and my dad was a shop supervisor at what was then CP&L. He was laid off in the mid-1980s when I was around 5 or 6 years old. He built a garage behind our house. He wanted to try the used car scene, which involved buying wrecked or broken vehicles, repairing, and then selling them. At first, things seemed okay and normal. For me, it was neat and fun having a garage behind the house, and now my dad was home all the time as well. I could go down to the shop, hang out, and watch my dad work. After a few years went by, car sales were not going well. My dad was a perfectionist and would invest more time and money in them than they were worth. He was losing money and ended up going through his entire life savings. As all this was going on, he was under a lot of pressure and stress to make enough to provide for our family, as well as have enough to keep running the business. All this stress made my dad an angry and uptight person. I was working with him every single day, and as I got older, I was expected to work. The fun, neat shop now felt more like a punishment. The work I did never seemed to be good enough for him, and no matter how hard I tried, he expected flawlessness, and his expectations were unrealistic for me. All my best efforts would never make the grade. The mood was always tense and verbally negative, and as I got older, things sometimes got physical. I tried to win his favor and approval, but couldn't quite seem to achieve it. And don't get me wrong, my dad is a great man, but he had his own struggles. He is a man of faith, which I feel is what got him through these hard times. I grew up in church, but for me, it didn't help. I was made to go to church 3 times a week during my entire childhood. Some of y'all can probably relate. But I never had a personal relationship with Jesus at all. It was just showing up. After the years, I saw people not living out what they said they believed, and this caused me to have bad feelings about church in general. My dad would yell at us sometimes on the way to church, then act happy and kind to people when we got there. And I can remember thinking to myself, why don't you show everybody else what you show us? Church became a chore, something I didn't want to do, but I had to do it. And it became a lot like the shop for me. For me, going through all this, all those years, it made me feel like I could never measure up and that I was not good enough for anything. I became insecure and unsure of myself and lacked the confidence in all that I did. It didn't matter how well I did something or how hard I tried. In my mind, it would not be good enough. I just couldn't do anything right. At 13 years old, I got drunk for the first time. And what do you know? I liked it. It made me feel good. I had no cares. The hurt was numb, and I thought I was happy. This is what Satan needed to get his hold on me. From this moment forward, escaping was a focus for me. By the time I started high school, I had become hardened and stopped caring about anything. I went from a National Honor Society student to failing my classes. I wouldn't let anybody get close to me because I didn't want to be hurt, and I did not want to not add up to them. I started getting high and would continue smoking weed daily for years. At 15, I was caught drunk at a football game and was taken home to my parents. And as you can imagine, which I wouldn't be either, my dad was not very happy. He lost his temper and beat me with the belt until I was lying on the floor in a fetal position. He stopped only because he needed a water break. And to this day, I thank God he does not have good cardio. He would probably still be going. But, thank you. It's a tough crowd, boy. On the way out of the room, he kicked me in my back. So the positive side was my mom ended up with a new clothes hamper because I fell into hers and smashed it. But this didn't slow me down at all. I just wanted to drink and get high even more, so I did daily. Once I turned 16 and got my license, I would binge drink or get high on something every single chance I got. I used pretty much any and every drug you can think of, from needles to cocaine, and I did it all trying to find an escape from my reality. I had liquor bottles hidden outside in the cars that were used for junk or parts. I hid drugs in a hole in my mattress and under a drawer in my dresser. I bet y'all didn't know that, did you? The older I got, the less and less I wanted anything to do with church. And by the time I was 17, I stopped going at all. When I was 18, my dad had a heart attack. And while he was in the hospital, it was my responsibility to get the remaining cars in the shop repaired and sold or returned to their owners. When he was well enough to come home, he told me he was getting a job and that I needed to do the same thing, so I did. As a young adult, now with a job and my own money, things only got worse. Imagine that. I continued to drink daily, and I drank to get drunk. It wasn't for the taste. I wasn't a connoisseur. I just drank. When I would go to parties, work functions, or just a friend's house for that matter, I was always that guy. I had to be the loudest, wildest, craziest person and attract the most attention everywhere I went. I was bitter and hard, and for a long time took a lot of possible life-altering risk. Things that could have in some situations killed me. Honestly, at the time, I didn't care. I was angry and hurt, and I always pushed my limits, always. My circle of friends called me Hell Raynor because I caused so much chaos. On a regular basis, I would take my cars out and drive them as fast as they would go. And obviously, I'm a car guy, so I've had a lot of fast cars. And not your mom's Honda Civic. All while drunk or high, by the way. I've gotten in high-speed chases with police, and I've even had a vehicle confiscated. I've had 3 DUIs, lots of wrecks, and totaled many cars. This has earned me community service and work-release jail time on the weekends. I've gone into my garage in the morning, looked at a damaged vehicle, and not even known what happened. I've lost my license for extended periods of time, but kept driving and was even caught doing that. I've been involved in many fights and several arrests. I have literally woken up hanging out of a running car. And yes, that was even weird as it sounds. I have woke up in my own puke and pee. I would also drink and do drugs at work and stay high or drunk my entire shift. I met Kat when I was 20, the beautiful blonde bombshell that was up here earlier. And we started dating. trying to score some points over here. Because, man, I've been rough on that crowd. Whew. In general, my behavior didn't change much, and even while dating caused many problems. I was even arrested on our second date, and she still stayed with me. She says she don't like bad boys, but I'm thinking she probably does. That's just me. I started hiding the severity of my drinking even then. We found out she was pregnant after we had only been dating for a year, and I have no idea how that happened. I felt getting married was an expectation of my parents. I needed to take responsibility for my actions and be a man, right? Doing things out of God's order caused a lot of tension and stress. It was, however, the best thing I ever did because she would always push me to be better and get the help I needed. So by 22 years old, I had moved out of the house, bought a house, had my daughter, and gotten married. All in the wrong order. I do not suggest anybody do that. And I was scared, honestly, but my daughter, man, I loved her so much. She just... I'll be honest, I didn't even want a kid. But when I saw her, it was just love from then on. It was amazing. And I know that's what I needed. God knew I needed that as well. And man, yeah, it was just like something sparked in me. She was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. That pollen again. Anyway, no matter what I did or how I was, as she grew up, she loved me unconditionally. Young children don't see our faults yet, but they will. 5 years later, my son was born, and I love him equally as well. I knew I never wanted to make him feel like I did with my dad. I constantly tell them both I'm proud of them, that they don't have to be the best. I'm proud of their best efforts, whatever they do. We struggled with normal young family stuff, complicated more by my continued drinking. The kids were mostly unaware of how bad it was. I hid it to the best of my ability, and Kat typically was shielding them from it, but it was ruining our marriage. We started going back to church on Sunday mornings because the kids needed it, right? But I was still very disconnected. 3 days after my 30th birthday, I was laid off from the company I'd worked for the past 11 years. I was confused because I had always been a great employee, and when this happened, made me even more bitter and angry. We had to pull the kids out of daycare, and I was responsible for watching the kids much of the time. But while they were in school or preschool, I was drinking. I would start to drink in the morning after dropping them off, and it continued throughout the entire day. It was so bad I began to try and hide it from my family. I had once again started hiding alcohol all around the house and even in places outside the house. I bought so much that I went to different stores within a 30-mile radius because I didn't want the gas station attendants or the liquor store clerks to think I had a problem, because I knew I didn't. Without a job to show up for every day, I would binge drink every single day. I got to the point I was waking up in the middle of the night just to drink so I could go back to sleep. During this time, I ended up going back to school for my degree and started my own business. I finally got saved during this time, but I didn't change my behavior. My addiction was still with me, but God had me. I was able to graduate college and start my business even in the midst of the chaos. I had no idea where my life was going. I was scared and confused. I felt like I was having to start my entire life over again, and I didn't even know where the starting line was. A couple of years later, in 2012, we started attending a new church in Clayton called XRC. We got involved with Life Group, and for the first time, I started connecting with people in church. A year later, I was baptized and started a discipleship with my pastor. I was still drinking, but I finally wanted to stop drinking. Very slowly, I started working on my relationship with God and others, but I was still trying to control my addiction on my own and getting nowhere. I tried to do it myself and failed over and over again. Each time I would lose control and drink way too much, and I'd ask for one more last chance and one more and one more. Finally, my wife had enough. Imagine that, because she is very easygoing, by the way. In early 2015, she had the cops come remove me from the house, and I started staying with my parents, and I knew I had to try something. My wife and I started counseling. I was going to AA meetings, and I even had a consultation to get an implant called naltrexone. I had grown sick of my addiction and wanted to stop, but nothing was helping me. When I would stop drinking for a few days at a time, my anxiety would get really bad. There were times when I literally thought I was going to die. I would rush to the first gas station I could find and would chug the alcohol down as soon as I was back in my truck. Because of these anxiety attacks, I ended up on anxiety medication. It helped take the edge off, but it didn't completely resolve the problem. I was still using alcohol to self-medicate and numb my inner anxieties and fears. Alcohol is legal and socially acceptable, so it's easy to convince yourself it's okay and that you can handle it. After a few months had passed, I thought I had fooled everyone into thinking I was getting better. I lied and told everyone that I wasn't drinking anymore, and I had even managed to convince my wife using a breathalyzer that I had altered the wiring in so it always read 0. Yeah, I fix stuff. I came back home, but I was living a lie, and I still thought I could hide it. In August of 2015, Kat went out of town for the weekend. This was the first time my kids saw my addiction up close and personal. This time, Kat wasn't there to shield them, and they saw and heard me really drunk, and they were scared to be there with me. I told them not to tell their mom because I would be kicked out of the house again. I can still remember the look of shame, hurt, and disappointment on my son's face. He was in anguish trying to eat his supper that night with those thoughts in his head. I hate I put that kind of pressure on him. He did not deserve it. My daughter called Kat because she's a snitch. Snitches get stitches. Kat came home and I was out of the house again. But this time it was bad. This was my lowest point. I was living with my parents and no one would believe me anymore. Kat bought a new breathalyzer and would keep it with her at all times and would make me use it to be around the kids or let them ride with me in the car. I was losing my family, my home, my business, and I was right back where I started, drinking and living with my parents. But here's where the story takes a turn. I had fallen low, but God was about to do something. Throughout this entire journey, I've had godly friends and family that have stood by me and loved me even at my lowest. My sister Emily told me about a program called Celebrate Recovery and a guy named John that I should talk to. And you know what? It wasn't even this elaborate, drawn-out invite, man. She just simply asked me to come, and I'm here. And it changed my entire life. So that's for y'all, man. It doesn't have to be, just invite somebody. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be something elaborate, right? Just invite. And that pollen. Whew. At the time, I figured it would be a waste of time like everything else I had tried. But this time, it was going to be on God's terms and not mine. I contacted John, and after meeting for the first time, something was different. I could tell he was genuine. The things he said made sense and were getting through to me. I started meeting with him on a weekly basis and coming to CR Friday nights, which is where we are, by the way. I would sit on the furthest outside area I could possibly find, and guess what? I even thought it was kind of weird. But I kept coming back, and week after week, little bits and pieces at a time, my walls were being torn down. Things were finally starting to click. For the first time, I really actually wanted to be sober, not just for me, but for my family who deserved it more than me. I also started to realize God had bigger and better plans for me, and that wouldn't happen until I surrendered. Finally, on chip night, I did just that. I picked up a blue chip and wrote alcohol and drugs on it with the date of August 24th, 2015. That night, I stopped drinking and made it almost 7 months sober. In March of 2016, my daughter got dangerously sick. She was in the hospital for a month, including the PICU, having multiple surgeries, and was in a medically induced coma. I felt like she was almost taken away from me. That whole process made me feel numb, like it wasn't even real. Selfishly, I relapsed. And I drank nonstop day and night for 2 days. My child needed me in her worst time of her life. I wasn't there for her. Like in my past, I was trying to deal with my fears and anxieties on my own. After all, with all that was going on, who wouldn't blame me for having a drink? It was justified. I didn't reach out for help even though I knew that's what I should have done. All of us need help at some point, and that's okay. Hebrews 2:8, since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested. Through even that situation, people still believed in me and kept pushing me for me to get better. My CR family, my XRC family, and my personal family all encouraged me to get back up and keep going. But God used this situation to teach me something extremely valuable. I did not want this lifestyle for myself or my family, no matter what situation I had to face. I could not do this to them again. I decided that from here on out, I would fight with everything in me to be the man I was supposed to be for them and God. Shortly after this, I started a new step study with John as my sponsor. And thank God at the time he didn't know 1,400,000,000 teen people, because he was able to invest in me. And I took this step study serious. I put in the work and I showed up to meetings ready to share and answer my questions. This step study walked me through the process of healing. It helped me identify why I had the struggles I do, and it helped me surrender these struggles to God. It put me in fellowship with other men who also wanted healing. It allowed me to form godly relationships where we could support one another and help hold each other accountable. I learned that the true power of forgiveness and making amends to the people you have hurt, and that this is necessary to start mending relationships. I was sober now, but my marriage was far from repaired. By this point, Kat was only still with me because she didn't want to put the kids through a divorce. I was basically living in the basement. We spent time in marriage counseling, working on and rebuilding trust and learning how to communicate. I commend her so much, mainly for not killing me, but also for putting up with all my crap and chaos and sticking with me. I did not deserve her. I apologized to my children and promised them that I was doing my best to work through this. Having to tell my daughter what I did was probably one of the toughest things I've ever done, but it was healing. And making my amends to Catherine was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done, but it was healing as well. Working through my step study helped me grow in my relationship with Jesus. I realized I can trust and rely on him to get me through any situation. Working through CR was the hardest but most important step for me was the first step. We admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives have become unmanageable. Romans 7:18, for I know that God, good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Until I finally admitted that I couldn't do it by myself and sought out help, I didn't begin to get better. I have to have Jesus front and center and surround myself with people who can support me. Without this initial complete surrender, I couldn't even start the process. This upcoming Tuesday, on the 17th, I will be 4 years clean and sober. Thank you, guys. After my relapse, I wrote my new surrender date, March 17th, 2016, on that exact same blue chip. I am proud of this accomplishment, but it took my willingness to surrender, allowing God to work in my life, work in this program, and surrounding myself with people who wanted to see me succeed. Now that I'm being obedient to God and following his plan and will for my life, he has blessed me beyond measure. He has put my family back together, restoring my marriage one step at a time, and allowing me to use my talents that he gave me for my business success. Good Lord, if you could say it. Jeremiah 17:10, but I, the Lord, search all hearts and examine secret motives. I give all people their due rewards according to what their actions deserve. I have a new relationship with my children now. I want to be involved in all that they do, and I get to soak it up with a sound mind, loving them like the father that I should be. God has healed my marriage. My wife and I are learning to trust one another and accept each other as we are, and we love and respect one another. We want to be married to each other and enjoy spending time together now. My life is amazing now that I no longer have an addiction that holds me and my family hostage. I have had the privilege of sharing my story with other people, even strangers, letting them know that there is hope because I was in bondage once also, but now I am free. I have forgiven my dad. I now know that things he did in the past are part of his struggle. I know he loves and cares about me. We have a great relationship, and I know he would do anything for me. I am a completely different person than I used to be. I grew up feeling like I could never do anything right. Now I know without a doubt that I have been blessed with special talents and gifts to use for God's glory. I am valuable and worthy of love. My walk with God is totally different now. I have a personal relationship with Jesus. I am no longer just a passive observer on Sunday mornings. I read my Bible daily. I talk to God, and I turn to God in prayer when I need something or have an issue I need to deal with, instead of allowing my anxiety to take over. And I no longer have to take anxiety medication either. I trust and follow God's will and next steps for my life. God has allowed me to serve others in a way I never imagined. I help lead on Open Share on Friday nights here at CR. I host a Saturday morning Bible study at my garage. At my home church, I'm privileged to be part of our prayer team and come alongside those who reach out for prayer. God has also given me many opportunities to reach out to others who are hurting and struggling with his message of hope and healing. Being in CR has made me realize we're all broken in some way, whether it seems big or small. Being involved, I learned we are all here to help one another. We hold each other accountable and push one another to be better, encouraging each other to live out the lives we are supposed to with purpose and meaning. With the newcomer, at first, CR may seem a little weird, but if you surrender to God, invest the time, show up to the meetings, and put in the work required, God can change you. Probably won't happen overnight, and it probably won't happen in your time. However, if you lean on Jesus, trusting in and following him, you will have a breakthrough. I can say this without a doubt because I have lived that breakthrough victory. God uses the rebels, the scarred, the suffering, the oppressed, the desperately hopeless for his victory stories. 1 Corinthians 1, 27 and 28, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. Tonight, I am fortunate enough to share my victory story. My addiction was to alcohol and drugs, but no matter what your hurt, habit, or hang-up is, how extreme or how small it may seem, there is hope. There is healing, there is sobriety, and there is freedom through Jesus Christ. Celebrate Recovery is a vehicle God uses to get us through it together. With him in control and us together as a body, we have the tools needed to overcome anything, and I mean anything. I am just one of many, many examples of victory in this very room. Hebrews 12:1, therefore, since we are all surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. Why wouldn't you give yourself an opportunity to join me and the many others and find your breakthrough victory? Thanks for letting me share.
You stay standing.